If you have a hard time with boundaries, how might your life be different if you could say no as easily as a joyful yes? I'm Love Coach Mariya, and for over a decade now, I've been encouraging folks to empower their compassion so it's big enough for ourselves as well as others, and so our boundaries can become healthier than ever. You're listening to Empower Your Compassion, and on this show, we'll be unlocking transformative insights to help you reconnect to your true yes, so you can say no from that more expansive energy and get more of what you want in your relationships and your life without sacrificing your compassion. Are you ready for more love? Let's grow. I'm here today with my dear friend Lora. We go way back, like over 30 years now.
Yes.
Yeah. And I've invited her on this show to talk with me about the T of the Gates method. And again, the G is about grounding in your body and your values. The A is about assessing your capacity and your true yes. The T is trusting in the other's ability to manage. The E is going to be about expressing your no without disconnecting. And the S is about stewarding your precious resources. So I'm going to let you, Lora, tell our listeners a little bit about why you think I've asked you to come today and talk about trusting other people's ability to manage our no and our boundaries.
Right. So first I'll start by saying, yeah, Mariah is one of my dear friends of, over 30 years. We've had many, many long, looking at the phone bills back when you had to pay for minutes, hours long phone calls just related to growth and relationships and friendships and navigating all those things throughout the 30 years that we've known each other. I am not a therapist. I am not trained in any specific way related to mental health or really any of these topics, except in life. I've had a lot of difficult relationships in my life, whether it's, with parents or romantic relationships, siblings, friendships. And I've also had a journey with sobriety and recovery, which is, an interesting story all on its own. But I just love having these discussions with Mariya, and I really was just so delighted when she asked me to come on. And I think that we're going to have a pretty fun and hopefully not too divergent conversation, because we tend to go off on tangents, but I'm really
I'm all
excited
about
to
the
be here.
tangents.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining. And I am all about the tangents. Yeah, I don't have a lot of episodes out yet, and I'm not sure how many you've had a chance to listen to. It doesn't really matter, but any of my listeners will know that, yeah, there's lots of tangents. This is kind of the whole thing.
Yeah,
So
we love a good tangent.
we do. Awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
This part about trusting the other's ability to manage is tricky, and I feel like there's two main parts to it. And one of them is kind of wrestling with our own rescuer tendency, where we feel like we have to say yes to people because on some level we might not recognize it, but we're not really trusting that they can handle it. And then the other aspect of this too is that sometimes we have a hard time trusting that other people can either handle whatever they need on their own, or that they can handle our no, is because we have lived experience of people not handling it very well. And so some of what we're going to talk about is how to navigate when people don't have the skills or tools to respect your boundaries when you state them.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You talk about like that rescuer tendency. Some people might think of it as like an aspect of codependence too, if that language sort of makes more sense for you. I have lived the past 45 years in rescuer mode constantly, and people pleasing, and really wanting to make sure that, to my own detriment, that I was managing everybody else's expectations and feelings and moods, and all of that sort of comes into play here. And I think what you're saying about them being able to handle the no sometimes can even go deeper. I won't get specific about which early relationships in my life fostered this, but being punished for saying no.
Yeah.
is something that I battled with for a long time in my life. And so when we started talking about it, I thought about how long does it take to get over the fear of being punished for saying no? Because I've seen that in romantic relationships as well, whether it be silence or, you know, um, an argument or, just sort of passive aggressive things around saying the word no. And how
Hmm.
long does it take to get out of that fear
Hmm.
and have that be the first sort of thing that you think of as being scared to say no?
Yeah.
That's
Um,
been something I've been working on for sure.
yeah. And it's of course not only how long does it take, but more kind of what does it take? Because the length
Yes.
of the
Yeah.
journey is going to be a little bit different for everyone anyway. Before we dive into that, I'm going to just put a pin in that for a
Yeah.
second. And I just want to start with like the easy version.
Right.
And one of my sort of default showroom examples is I had a friend one time ask if I could help her move today. Like I knew she was gonna be moving, but I didn't really quite know when, and I hadn't heard from her. And then she was like, "Hey, can you help me move today? Like right now?" I'm like, "No." And I remember having this fluster of like, I don't know, part of the recovering people pleasers, like you have to say yes when people ask you for something, especially if they need your help with something.
Yeah.
And but I literally couldn't. I mean, I could maybe, and my brain started working out like, how could I rearrange my day and make it happen? And I was like, this is just kind of an insane ask, even. And I was just like, and I was wrestling with it, but quickly and just internally. And I was just like, no. And it was like so painful. And she's like, okay, it's cool. And like she didn't mind at all. And
Right.
that was partly where that concept of trust and the other person's ability to manage. And I often also add, you are rarely anyone's only resource. And sometimes, like, she was asking just because I'm one of her friends, but I'm one of her friends. She had other friends, she had other resources, and she was fine with me saying no. She had other people that were able to come in and help. I didn't have to like twist myself up about it. Um, on a side note, I did say though that I could help her unpack, which is something I've really learned to appreciate also as a recovering people pleaser, being able to follow a no with a yes. So now the example I use is kind of like a modified version is like, oof, no, I can't help you move today, but I can help you unpack this weekend. And that way, like I can still say no without like disconnecting. But um, so that's the simple idyllic version of like you're uncomfortable saying no, but you say it anyway and they're fine with it and they can manage and they can accept your no, they can roll with it and they can handle whatever it is that they were asking you for. Like, and I feel like in the majority of cases for the majority of people, that's probably applicable. But yeah, what I mostly wanted to talk about today is when it's not quite that simple and ideal.
Well, and yeah, like you were saying, like I was thinking it, like as you were saying it, about probably 90% of the people that you're going to say that to are going to be totally fine with it, and they're going to understand because they knew it was sort of a reach to ask anyway. So, um, but then, like you were saying, because she had other resources, but like, what about those relationships where you find yourself consistently being someone's only resource? And I think that just being that person's only resource is not the only issue going on there. And us being people pleasers can be targets for those people. I don't even mean consciously, subconsciously, they're just attracted to that in
Yeah,
you. And you find yourself in this really kind of painful dynamic for everyone because they're constantly feeling needy. And when you start to use your boundaries, you feel bad for implementing your boundaries. And it's just everyone feels crappy all around all the time for the most part. And like, what's the point of that relationship at that point?
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is probably a good place to bring up the Cartman drama triangle, which is the victim, the rescuer, and the persecutor. I'm not going to unpack all of it right now. Anyone listening, I highly recommend looking it up. Lynn Forrest did an amazing write-up on it as well. I think she calls it the three faces of victim. And also just as sort of a disclaimer, caveat, asterisk here is that There is absolutely a huge difference between being the victim of like a random violation and living your life with a victim mindset where you feel like life is just happening to you and you have no control over anything. And rescuers and victims in with those like capital terms, these like archetypes, like they tend to kind of attract to each other and form these codependent dynamics. And when you are someone's only resource for like most things in life, like that should be a huge red flag. And then the problem too, what the rescuer archetype does on a subconscious level, having other people need them and being reliant on them gives them a sense of purpose. And so when
We're like, you need me. Yay.
yeah, and look at what all this good I'm doing, right? And let me help you. And it feels so good to help you. But the help that the rescuer does is it's kind of like the give a man a fish versus teach him how to fish.
The
And
enabling, yeah.
so the help that the rescuer often does, and this is no shame, and this is all very subconscious, but it's enabling their dependence. So like if I come in and do it for you or fix it for you or solve the problem for you, that doesn't actually build your foundation to become more self-reliant. It just keeps you reliant on me. And
Yeah,
that's how these dynamics perpetuate.
it's like shoveling good energy into a black hole, right? It's just like siphon, like just goes straight through. It doesn't feed their soul or create better circumstances. I mean, you can help someone to lift them out of bad circumstances, but at a certain point, when are they carrying their own water? When are they, saying, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I'm on my feet. Thank you for that help or that monetary contribution or whatever it is." Like you really made a difference. And I tend to find the people that would really benefit from that kind of help are usually not the people that are asking you for it.
It's funny too. I've also noticed, like on the other side, people who are actively trying to help themselves and struggling, onlookers are much more likely to be like, oh my gosh, let me help you with that. Versus people who aren't even trying and they're just like, I can't do anything. Like someone needs to come save me. And then who comes to answer those callers, right? Like those are
The
the
unhealthy
rescuers who then are like,
rescuer.
oh yeah, let me do it for you.
I saw a term recently that I thought was really interesting called dry begging. Have you heard of this?
Mm-mm.
It's like where, like, this is just a very easy example, but someone could say something like, "Oh man, I'm so hungry and there's just like no food in my fridge. I just, God, it just would be so much better if there was food in my fridge." And then, yeah, and then the person sitting next to you goes, "Well, let me take you to the grocery store. Let's put some food in your fridge." Just because in their mind, they're the helper and they're like, "Ooh, a problem, let's solve it."
So again, the three roles on the Cartman drama triangle is the victim, rescuer, and persecutor. And by the way, the persecutor is more like a bully type archetype. And usually the victim's like, I don't know it's not my fault. I don't know whose fault it is, but I didn't fucking do it. I can't fix it either. Someone else is going to need to come in and fix it for me because I'm completely helpless. And so the rescuer's like, oh, I'll help you. And the persecutor, though, like their MO is like, it's not my fault, but I know whose it is and it's yours. You need to fix
Right.
it. But
And it's that like flipping of everything into someone else's fault.
yes. And the reason Lynn Forrest calls it the three faces of victim is partly why, to me, the unifying theme of that triangle is what I call misplaced responsibility.
Mhm.
So no one is responsible for themselves in this. And it's like, I'm not responsible for my feelings, you are, but you're not responsible for your feelings, I am. And so the way the rescuer plays in though, because it's not about them, it's about someone else, what they do is enable the victim's delusion of disempowerment. They also believe that the victim doesn't have any power. The victim's like, I'm powerless. The rescuer's like, yeah. So someone else, and I apologize, I don't recall the person's name, came up with the empowerment dynamic where you flip the triangle and the victim, instead of saying, I can't, can say, how can I? And they can become the creator.
Mm.
And I'm going to skip over to the persecutor. The persecutor can shift into what they call the challenger. And so oftentimes when you're feeling aggro, like someone did kind of wrong you, but in the challenger framework, you are recognizing your role in the situation. And when you bring it to the other person, you're like, okay, here's what happened. Here's how I see my role in it. And here's how I see your role in it. And here's what you could maybe do to prevent something like this in the future. I believe in you. Go do whatever you need to do to like shore that up, and we can move forward. And then, so what the rescuer can do though is become the coach by believing in the victim's power, like innate sovereignty and power, and even holding that belief when they lose sight of it and holding it for them. And so when they come and they're like, I have this problem, the rescuer can become the coach by saying first to themselves, like, oh, here's a powerful being in front of me who has lost her crown or whatever, it's like forgotten. But so you just ask powerful questions. You're like, oh, that does seem like a big problem. Assuming they are powerful, what are you going to do about it? How can I help you? What are your options? You can, in that way, actually be helpful and not enabling.
Right, right. And you're talking about accountability. It's a common thing a common theme in so many topics that you talk about, not just this section. But I find taking accountability, it's a game changer. I was in recovery for several years, and some of the things that can contribute to substance abuse disorder is lack of accountability, living in that victim mentality. The world is happening to me, everything's happening to me, I have no control over it. And I know some people sort of argue the point of like everything that happens to you, there is a role that you played in what happened. I know some people argue against that, and I think that there are some exceptions, obviously, like violent attacks, things of that nature, where, and we can just rule those out because we all know that the victims are not to blame in those scenarios. But in every situation that you're in, once you're
An adult. I'm
an
also going to add
adult,
that
right?
caveat as well. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. An adult, if you continue to participate in those roles, then you are partially to blame for the outcome of those situations and the damage that you allow to continue. And so taking that accountability and, let's say you make a mistake at work and your first inclination is to say, oh, I don't know who did it. It wasn't me. Because you just don't want to get in trouble because the little kid inside of you that got, in trouble for spilling the milk, it just goes, protect yourself, right? Whereas when you evolve a little bit more and you say, that was absolutely me, I did not foresee that being the outcome, I misunderstood the instructions, or whatever the reason is, take full accountability. All of a sudden, the situation's diffused. You don't hang on to that guilt for saying it wasn't me. And getting over that hump of like practicing taking accountability, all of a sudden your life opens up and becomes your friends, family, coworkers trust you more because when you do make mistakes, you take accountability for them. They are able to rely on you in a healthy manner when they think about, oh, who can I count on? They think about you because they know no matter what happens, you're going to take responsibility for what happened. It's a really great feeling. And that solves a lot of that shame and victimhood sort of mentality that it's easy to get stuck in. Um, so I think this accountability solves so many problems that we talk about in all of these different areas. I just had to kind of
Absolutely.
throw that in as a side.
Yeah. And I'm going to riff on that a little bit with some semantics. So responsibility and accountability are often used interchangeably, and I don't necessarily have a problem with it, but I do find it helpful to have some functional distinctions. And I like thinking of responsibility as responsibility. Like you can't ability for me. We are each responsible for ourselves and accountable to each other. So I'll break that down a little bit more, but like we're especially responsible. And again, this is also adults because I know that a lot of it gets blurry because a lot of what we talk about has to do with trauma that started as children. And of course, when we're children and dependence, like legit dependence, it's different. So this is all just in the realm of adults. We are responsible for our feelings and our choices. No one else can feel our feelings for us. No one else can make our choices for us. And where accountability comes into play, though, is like, especially in a relationship where you know each other well, if I say the word airplane in a room full of strangers, there might be a variety of reactions. Someone might be like, "Ooh, yay, when are we going somewhere?" And someone else might be like, "Oh, not again. I travel every other week for business." Someone else might be like, "Can we not? I don't want a plane. I don't like planes. They're super scared of flying," right? But I didn't know any of that, and I literally just said the word airplane. However, and so like there's not really an accountability there. But if we're in a close relationship and I know you're terrified of flying and I, throw a triggering word out, like the word accountability is like being held to account. In a way, it's just cause and effect. So if I say something triggering, triggers you, it's going to have an impact on our relationship. I am going to be held to account for that. Like the consequences of it are going to come out one way or another. But when I own that accountability and I say, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, it slipped my mind," and you do some repairs,
Right.
that's where the accountability comes into play. So taking responsibility for managing our emotional experiences. So in this example, if I say airplane, you can take responsibility for not throwing something at me. You can
Right.
choose to respond calmly and consciously rather than just react to the emotions that come up. And I can take accountability for my impact on you by making some repairs. Does that make sense?
And sort of practically applying that too, not to bring it back to recovery, but I learned this in recovery also, pausing. Because especially when you've been, sort of embroiled in substance use for quite a while, your emotional reactivity, like you're kind of a raw nerve, especially when you've stopped using any substances, you're a raw nerve. And so something will happen and maybe you sort of fly off the handle because you feel these feelings so intensely and maybe you're not used to having to manage them without assistance of something else, right? So when you manage these, you might say airplane and I feel immense fear. And I could just go, "What are you talking about? Why would you ever say that?" Whatever it is. Or I could be like, "Oh, I'm feeling this feeling, and feelings do exist, and I can't ignore them, but I'm just going to feel this for a moment. It's not going to kill me. It's not going to hurt me. It's going to be okay to feel this feeling. Let that feeling pass because they always do." And if you take that moment and you haven't initially reacted, you essentially stop the progression of something you didn't want to happen. Because I don't want to scream at my partner. I don't want to, when I know what didn't come from a malicious place, I don't want to start an argument. I don't want to like ruin the rest of the day, week, month because I've flipped out. It's taking that pause and being like, okay, how do I really want this situation to go? What am I really trying to get across? Hey, Mariah, I'm really upset that you forgot that I have this fear of airplanes and that you let it slip. I'm really like, I feel like disregarded or I feel like you don't pay attention or whatever it is. But once you take that pause, you're able to like practically take responsibility for that reaction. And then that responsibility is a lot less heavy because you're not like, "Hey, I'm really sorry I freaked out on you. I felt bad for the last 3 days. I'm sorry we haven't talked. There's been silence, there's been awkwardness." You get to avoid all of that by just like pausing.
And to carry that further, in this scenario, when you say, "Hey, that brought some shit up for me, and I'm a little bummed that you let that
Didn't
slip,"
remember. Yeah.
now I have an opportunity to pause and not get defensive and be like, "Well, I didn't mean to," or I didn't mean to hurt you. It's not my fault, and instead, that's where we can pause. So you pause and then take responsibility for your feelings, and then I can pause and take accountability for my impact.
Yeah, and while everyone listening visualizing that might be like, that looks like, a therapist session with two people trying to argue, but like in practice, man, it makes a big difference. Like It really has been a game changer for me in relationships. And it's also been a really quick indicator of red flags in a relationship. Because if I do that and they still continue with the defensiveness, then I know there's some sort of mismatch on, I don't know if emotional intelligence is the right word, but there's a mismatch there onto the levels of like how we communicate. And that's been, a really early indicator for me if like this person's on the same part of the journey that I am.
Yep. And with that therapy reference, like, and I love that you said in practice, because also with practice, this
Yes.
doesn't need to be a therapy session. It's a moment of pausing, recognizing, saying, just a reminder that's a bit of a trigger for me, and I'm a little bit hurt that you forgot. And then the other person pauses and says, I'm sorry that that happened. Thank you for telling me. I really appreciate you sharing that with me. It absolutely wasn't my intention. Move on with the rest of your day. That's it. Like, it's not
Turns
a
out we're
giant
still going to
therapy
have a great lunch or a
session.
great date or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
Day goes on. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And sort of a little side benefit to that is when you take that minute and you pause and you come back with a cogent argument about what's going on in your mind, you get like a little boost of like, oh, I'm a little bit proud of myself for that. Like I just stayed in control. I communicated what I was really deep down intending to communicate. I didn't just react.
Yep.
And that's a confidence booster. That's a self-esteem booster. That's just like a little extra brick in that, foundation for yourself. I don't know. It's pretty great.
And the more you do that, it also actually builds up self-trust.
Mm.
And that self-trust can really serve in, of course, a variety of ways. But one big way that that self-trust can serve you is in facing the fear of rejection or conflict or whatever it is when you need to assert a boundary.
Mhm.
And when you know that you can trust yourself to have your back and to self-regulate and all of these things, then you can take a deep breath and you can be like, okay, this is scary. I'm going to say no. They might freak out. I'm nervous about that, but I know that I've got my back.
And
And then
and
you
you say
say
that,
no.
yeah, you say that and it like resonates so true for me. Like I didn't think of it that way. That's the perfect way to put it because, sure, I've tried to say no before and I'm like, no. But then because I'm like, am I saying no because I really rather just lay in bed and then is laying in bed and okay? And then should I just be laying in bed? Is there something wrong with me? Like you go down this like shame spiral, right? Because you don't trust that saying no is cool because you're really fine with it. That self-trust is like,
It's a
that's
biggie.
delicious. I like that concept. So when we were talking about handling saying no to someone, the other side of that is how do we react to being told no? So if you're working on saying no and you tell me no, how do I continue to keep trust in the relationship and accept the no in a way that allows you to keep telling me no or doesn't scare you to tell me no? So there's a dual responsibility with this, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, Semi-related, but I'm just thinking about this because it's in the TED Talk that I am rehearsing and trying to learn and trying to land a stage for. Um, in that talk, I share a story about my early encounters with actual healthy boundaries, and this local community of people who were just like amazingly boundaried. Um, and one of the things that I noticed was they were very comfortable saying no, and they were able to do it in a way without disconnecting. And I'm going to talk more about that in 2 weeks with my friend Sarah, who's actually the founder of that community. The honesty in their no's left me feeling safe to be upfront about my no's too, without worrying about their feelings getting hurt or them trying to twist my arm. And then I also realized that, like, if they're so comfortable saying no, then their yeses are probably sincere, which means that I don't have to like wring my hands like, are you
Relief.
sure?
Relief.
Right? And I didn't
Yeah.
realize how often I doubted people's yes because so many people lie about it because they don't want to say no.
Yeah.
And then it made it so that like I could really relax also into whatever they were a yes to, knowing that they wanted to be there. Because if they didn't, they would have just said no because they
They
do
can
that
say
so
no.
easily, right?
Yeah.
And then also again, like with the part where it made me feeling more safe to be upfront about my no's too, I was just like, just it was so much safety and trust that was created in the dynamics. I was like, holy shit, I want to bring that to my relationships too.
Yeah.
I want to be someone that's safe to say no to. And I think I can start modeling that by saying no, because
Right.
then people will know that they can trust my yes. And like when you are more consistently boundaried as well, even if like it's perfectly natural and okay to be disappointed when someone says no. It's like if I invite you to come out and you really want to stay in bed at this stage where you and I are both healthy about boundaries, I'm like,
Well,
yay.
working on it over
Yeah,
here, working on
work in progress
it.
still, right? But relatively, we've come a long way.
Yeah.
But like, I love you and I want to care for you. And you're helping me care for you by caring for yourself. And so if you need to stay in bed, I'm like, awesome. And shucks, I'm a little bit bummed. I was hoping that you would come with me. It would have been so much fun, but I would rather you do what you need to do.
But yeah, and then it's not my job to take on your disappointment. I
Right?
think that's still a huge thing for me is yes, I'm getting better about saying no, but I'm also have a hard time not going because they're disappointed. So I'm working on that like they're allowed to be disappointed. It was their expectation, not an expectation I told them they should have.
Right.
So I didn't contribute to that expectation.
Mhm.
And like in the grand scheme of things, someone not going out on a Friday night is not that big of a deal. Like it's a minor disappointment and it's okay to like let someone down a little bit like that sometimes. Or not let them down, but to to be a part of what disappoints them is okay. Yeah.
And I mean, that right there really is the crux of this T part of the Gates method, trusting in the other's ability to manage.
Yeah.
Like, I also really love this concept, and I forget the quote because it was kind of in like a poetic way that didn't really like stick in my brain. But the concept that I came across at one point was like, don't ever apologize for helping someone feel anything. Like
Right.
the dead don't feel. I love the skull behind you, by the way. Um,
It's fitting.
I'm not currently wearing it, but I have a ring with like a tiny little skull that I liked keeping around for two reminders. One, that an ego death is not death, and it's okay if like my ego is scared about something and it likes to pitch a fit, but it's not the end of the world, and let
Right.
the ego die as many times as it needs. It's fine. And then the second reminder too is that we all die. Life is short and it's precious, and like don't get hung up on the small stuff, you know?
And that's the older I get. I think that that's natural, right? The older we get, the more and more
Closer
we
to
feel
death.
our more sense of mortality. We see,
Mhm.
friends and family pass. We experience grief and loss in our lives, and it makes the immediacy it just become a lot more apparent and makes time feel more valuable. And so in that way too, like that can contribute to boundaries, being like life is too short for me to be constantly doing things that I don't want to be doing for people I shouldn't be doing them for. And realizing like how truly valuable that time is and how and where it's best to spend it and allocate it to really make the most of what you've got.
Yeah. And
That's
so
really important.
while we're alive, we're going to feel things. You
Mhm.
know, the Buddhists say life is suffering, not because you should try and work around it, but just like accept that you're going to feel things. And our capacity to feel joy is inseparable from our capacity to feel pain.
And
And
currently, societally, if you look at it, our huge drive is to never feel discomfort. Every most products out there, most lifestyle brands, most all of these things, it's all pushing towards laws. Everything is all pushing towards little to no discomfort. If we can completely eliminate discomfort, then we have succeeded, which I think is just really short-sighted.
well, and speaking of that too, it's not only it has taken it to the next level as well and implied that we're entitled to comfort, and
Mhm.
that so many people think that like any amount of discomfort is like affront to their natural right to perpetual comfort. And
Comfort is not a right. Should that be the new t-shirt?
Well, and not only is it not right, yeah, I love that. But not only is it not a right, it's not healthy.
It
Like
doesn't serve us. Yeah.
all living things, and you know this, by the way, friends and listeners, Laura is, can I say botanist? I don't know. You've got an expertise in plants.
Plant pathologist.
There we go.
Yeah.
So you will at least share this understanding. Like trees, for example, thrive more in sort of and probably not all trees, but most trees will thrive more in like a forest setting where there's a little bit of competition for sunlight. Like their roots will get stronger, their branches will be stronger. And the ones that like we randomly plant in the middle of like nowhere, then we need to step in and like prune them and help and give them a little bit of like
Right.
friction. Like squirrels do better if they got to go hunting for their nuts, like they
Yeah.
like
Wine
everything.
grapes. Perfect example. You get the best wine from wine or from vines that have struggled. Like that's sort of the philosophy behind it,
It's
so.
even that little story about the little boy who like helped the butterfly out and it ended up dying because it needed the pressure of coming out to push the blood through its wings.
Yeah.
Like we need discomfort.
Yeah.
And this is something we talked about in this show on another episode with my friend Jules about getting in your body and learning to um, listen to and decipher and hear the very subtle language our body communicates with us in. And I think for any personal growth journey, including healing into boundaries, it's really important to be able to discern the difference between safe discomfort and unsafe discomfort. And I've talked about that at length. Please listen to other episodes, but like getting in your body, I feel like is the only way to really do it. Like you can conceptualize to a certain point, it'll get you so far, but like your body is really going to be the final arbiter for you on discerning safe and unsafe discomfort. And so I do just want to say that there are both, those are two types, but yes, an amount of discomfort is important for our well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the things that I always love, or the things that I recommend if it isn't there, is like practical applications. Because I love to think about all of these things and I love to hear about all of these things and kind of do the imagination and work through it. I especially love working through it with you. We have such good conversations, but I always love practical, like, and you're pretty experienced with this now. So someone like me who's learning how to say no, joyfully say no, how do you start to say no? Do you pick the people that you can say no to and it's not going to, because if it's horrible, when you first start doing it, it's like a little eggshell, it's going to break down and you kind of need to temper that or make the wall a little stronger maybe before you're talking to your abusive parent and telling them no as opposed to, your best friend. Do you have any recommendations of how to like flex that muscle to build it up? Um, so that you're in situations where you can stand by your no?
Absolutely. There are two things. The first one is about that self-trust that we talked about. Like that's
Mhm.
huge. I really believe that like the most impactful thing that we can do towards becoming wholly boundaried people. And by the way, I think that that's so much more effective than just starting to do boundaries is to become a boundaried person. And it's all about rooting your security within. And so building all of that up, it's almost like saying no is the tip of the iceberg and an internally rooted security is that foundation below the surface.
Yeah.
So there's all of that work that goes into it. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But the short answer, the second part is what I mentioned before. I really, really love the tool of following a no with a yes. Like as a recovering people pleaser, that makes it feel so much safer to my nervous system to be able to honor my no without disconnecting from the other person by following it with something that I am a yes to. And by the way, it doesn't have to be, well, first of all, it shouldn't be a lie. Like
Right.
it should be something that you really are feeling comfortable with. And it doesn't have to, I want to say compensatory, but I mean in the sense of like it doesn't have to be apples to apples. I might say I'm not available for that, but I really adore you and I appreciate you and I'm so glad you're in my life.
Yeah.
Like
Or
the
I can't help you move, but I'm definitely sending you some housewarming flowers because wow, I know you're really excited about this new place.
The point I'm trying to make here is that it doesn't have to be a thing. Like I said, because that's kind of apples to apples. It's like I can't do that favor, but I can do this favor, which is fine. But it can also be just like connection in the moment, you know?
Yeah.
Like, no, I can't do that thing with you or for you or whatever, but like I just want you to know that I really appreciate you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's great. And who doesn't
Right?
like to hear that?
Right.
We all want to hear that,
And I
especially
think
as people pleasers.
yeah. And I think that in the same way that people can conflate guilt with shame, instead of I did a bad thing, I'm a bad person.
Right.
I think that on a sort of subconscious level, a lot of us have a tendency to like translate a no to my request is a no to me as a person. And
Right.
so that's where that yes on the flip side of the no can help assuage any concerns of that and kind of, you know, maintain the bond in the
Yeah,
relationship.
because not everyone's on that journey. So that's kind of a nice tool to be able to hold that type of interaction with someone who's not there yet.
And I think circling back to the internally rooted security part, like it's the inner work, right? And this is why my whole thing is empowering compassion too, so that it's big enough for ourselves as well as others. And like learning how to show up for ourselves, learning how to reparent our inner child, learning how to shift our locus of safety and security from external sources to internally, building up that self-trust through showing up for ourselves and honoring our limits, like all of these things, like they just start to feed on each other as well. And um circling further back to your initial question about like what do we do when we have past traumatic experiences of people really being harmful in their reaction to your no, and the effect that has on your nervous system and how it can make it really, really difficult for you to say no as an adult. Um, I think similarly that same healing journey of developing an internally rooted security is what allows you to be able to start facing that fear and developing an embodiment practice too that helps you get more in touch with your body's wisdom and intuition. Eventually you're gonna start energetically, almost magically weeding out, filtering out
Mhm.
people in your life that are gonna respond that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like, boundaries for me has been I think obviously a lifelong journey, but I didn't really recognize what it was. I don't think I've put a name to it probably till the last 4 or 5 years. And for me, the way I was able to sort of parse out, okay, like what's a trauma response? What's a boundary? What's like just sort of trying to get through those weeds because sometimes internally it can all kind of feel the same. It's just icky and you don't quite know why. You don't know if it's a boundary being pushed. You don't know if it's just reminds you of your mom or, whatever it is. So really, what really helped me initially was saying, what are my non-negotiables? Like what things will I not tolerate? Whether that's something as basic as name calling and then my home needs to feel safe. If I have a partner at home and I'm coming home and I'm not feeling like I want to walk in that front door, I want to find every other thing I can do to not come home, that's a problem and that needs to be addressed. And if I just started there. And when I started there, then all of a sudden I was like, okay, that's a totally reasonable request. And if you talk to the person in your life that's causing these problems when there's not a problem, and you say, hey, isn't this a reasonable request? And they're like, absolutely, we all want to come home. And then when things start to happen that sort of push against that boundary, you're able to be like, hey, we both discussed that home should feel this way, and it's not feeling like that for me now. And this is why, blah, 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 are these things that can change. And then you sort of go from there. But finding that, like you said, that foundation, that self-trust to be like, okay, at least I know if it hits here, this is a boundary. And then you start to recognize more and more of those because those boundaries are there. It's just whether you're enforcing them or not, right? So you start to feel more of those feelings that feel similar, and you're like, wait, that's also a really reasonable request. And you start to realize how many of your boundaries are incredibly reasonable requests, and you can't believe you let it go on this long.
Yes.
And it's a pretty empowering, amazing feeling.
Yes.
And then I think no is like, being able to say no is like, so that's incredibly empowering. Like all of a sudden you're like superwoman or super person. And it feels really good. So
Yes.
yeah.
The empowerment that comes from owning our boundaries and crafting our lives in alignment with them is definitely huge, especially for recovering people pleasers.
Yeah.
And I also just want to, again, semantics a little bit. Um, Boundaries and needs are both really
Mhm.
important and they're not the same thing. And there is a lot of like murky blurriness in some ways where they can overlap. And I think that it can cause a lot of confusion. And I don't unfortunately have a perfectly clear answer for it. But in general, requests or needs, we make requests for needs and we honor our boundaries. So usually honoring a boundary is more about like removing ourselves from situations or not participating in certain situations or not being available for certain dynamics, etc. Um, like there's still sometimes needs under there that your boundaries are honoring.
Well, or that, that your boundaries are protecting,
Yeah,
right? A
exactly.
lot of your boundaries will protect your basic needs.
Yeah.
Especially I think when you're first starting to learn like what boundaries feel like.
Mhm.
Um, I know for me right now, a lot of my boundaries are protecting just these basic needs that I have because for so long I was willing to like sacrifice almost all of my basic needs for the either the diffusion of a situation or for the you want to say like the pleasure or joy of others, but often people who push you to that point aren't feeling pleasure or joy no matter how much you give them. So it's kind of a misnomer in that way. Because you're not pleasing those people you're trying to please. They're never pleased. They can never be pleased. They're generally black holes.
Well, and the other thing too, like people pleasing, to your point, it's not just not about pleasing because they're being pleased. If you, it's also not about pleasing because you're actually just trying to mitigate conflict and trying to keep them in a positive regard of you. You're trying to like
Right.
maintain acceptance. If you think about it, like a lot of the people pleasing behaviors that we do, and sometimes I prefer to use fawning because of this, but
Right.
people pleasing is such a more commonly understood term. If you really wanted to please them and like delight them, it would be an entirely different course of action.
Right. And the people that you're trying to please likely aren't even trying to be pleased.
Right.
You know what
Right.
I mean? I've come up against people that were much farther along in like their healing journey or much more emotionally intelligent. And I've been the one that's been sort of the less progressed person than them, and I'm like creating these dynamics and they're just like I don't want any of like they can see me coming from a mile away, like I can see some people coming up from a mile away now. Like I'm not saying that I've always been in like the more evolved shoes because that's not been the case. Definitely come across people in my life that I look back and I go, oh, that's what that dynamic was. That's why they weren't interested in participating. That's why we aren't still in communication. So it's interesting to sort of look back on those dynamics and be like, oh shoot.
Yeah.
Whoops.
Learning.
Yeah. And when you're people pleasing or fawning, a lot of times you really just feel like you're trying to do the right thing. You're trying to do the best right thing.
I think that's the story we tell ourselves, but on a subconscious nervous system level, we are just trying to manage other people's feelings and emotions so that we can feel safe.
Right. Which is impossible to do.
Yeah. Which is why we need to root our sense of safety and security inside of ourselves. Because with that external orientation, it's like trying to anchor yourself to the ocean
Right.
itself instead of like into the ground, which is
Right.
beneath your feet.
Right. Yeah. That makes total sense. I love it.
So, trusting in the other's ability to manage when you need to say no. And the reason I put that, it's the Gates method. So the T is that trusting the other person's ability to manage comes before express your no without disconnecting. Um, But you kind of have to tap into that self-trust before you even say your no. It's all about foundation building. So like we start with the grounding, we start with the assessment, we start with the trust, and then we speak our truth.
Right.
And then the S of the Gates method, the steward your limited resources, is kind of about like ongoing boundary management. And also it comes after the express as well, because we can express a boundary and it might sound like, when I receive harsh criticism, I feel shame. And so to care for myself in situations like that, I will just remove myself from the conversation. But then you actually have to follow up on that. You have to stick to that and like honor that on an ongoing basis. Next time it happens, you've got to walk away like you said you would. And not just because you said it, but because you know it, like something inside of you told you that that's what you needed for self-care. And so by being consistent in that, not only are you building trust in the relationship, you're building that self-trust as well.
Right. Well, and if you think about it from the flip side, when you don't and you go back on that, it erodes that self-trust a little bit, right?
Yep.
So there's a
And when you,
consequence to that, you know?
yeah, I think that we end up here in the first place from a lack of self-trust. So we're starting from low self-trust and our work is to build it up. And the more we go on not having that self-trust, it perpetuates that external orientation. The reason it can be so hard to break out of these cycles is when you don't have that internally rooted security, you're living in that sense of insecurity and you have no self-trust. So you have a lot of self-doubt. So even when you think you are recognizing that a boundary is being crossed, you even doubt that.
Absolutely.
So as you are on your not only substance recovery journey, but your people pleaser recovery journey, are there any other like questions you have about like how to put it into practice?
Ooh, that's a good question. I feel like every day I sort of chip away. Well, maybe not every day, but most days I like chip away at something small and new. I also think that I have like these growth spurts and then I sort of like reach a plateau where I'm sort of like, I know there's something else that I'm pushing up against, but I can't quite identify what it is. And I found that for me, that's always like a really good time to get a therapist, even if it's just for a few months or however long it takes to get past that plateau and sort of break open something new. I think that's really helpful. And then you also teach some courses, right?
I do. I have a program specifically for boundaries. Um, and I just wanted to clarify, I'm not a therapist. I am a
Right.
coach. However, I do provide a lot of tools and safe space. And, you know, we've talked about a lot on this show, on this episode, as well as other episodes I've done. And it's one thing to gather all of these insights and it can feel really uplifting in the moment, but without integration and implementation, they're not really going to help you create lasting change. So for anyone who is struggling with people pleasing, you don't have to continue doing that. And I am one of many resources that can support you through becoming a wholly boundaried person with an internally rooted security. So you don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. It is perfectly human to need some support. So I feel like that's kind of something I've been put on this earth to do. And there are many others out there willing and happy to. But if you like my vibe, go to explorelovingboundaries.com. You can grab a spot on my calendar, no charge, no strings, and I'll just hold loving space to really listen to you about your challenges. And you'll walk away with greater clarity on these patterns that are maybe kind of keeping you stuck, as well as some personalized insights and a roadmap for moving forward, whether we work together or not. So honestly, while this is fresh, go do that now. Your future self will thank you.
Yeah. Well, and roadmap is for me is like the biggest thing. Like we can talk about these concepts all we want, but it's those practical applications. And some people get the concepts, but they don't necessarily see how to practically apply them in their specific lives because their situations are a little bit different or the relationship dynamics are a little bit different. So I think it's so helpful that you have that added piece of like, because man, read or listened to a lot of people on, social media and all of these things that have these really epic, really in-depth things to say. And I'm like, cool, how do I do that for me? Like, what's the next step? Because, some of us need it spelled out. And I think
Well,
that that's really cool.
I think it's not just some of us. I like one of my biggest gripes with kind of modern self-help stuff, a lot of what's out there, especially in social media and whatnot, is these like how-tos, right? Or like these are the things you should do and these are the things you shouldn't do. Or like this is all of the things that go on in a healthy relationship and these are the things that go on in an unhealthy relationship. Don't do this, do this,
Right.
And this is all that like tip of the iceberg stuff. Or even when it comes to boundaries, all people tell you is no is a complete sentence. And you're like, okay, cool. Well, how do I overcome the gripping fear of saying no? Like,
Right. Where do
it
I start?
sounds so
Maybe,
easy.
maybe you don't want to start with telling your overbearing boss no. Like maybe that's not the best place to like practice this, but maybe like your best friend who wants to go out on a Friday night, like yeah,
Sure.
there's some ways to enter into the practice, I think that might be more helpful than others.
Well,
Uh,
and even beyond that as well, it's not just about the doing. Like we actually create lasting change by shifting the being we're doing from. And so if all you're working on to create change is at the level of doing, it's not really going to be a sustainable solution. And so the work that I do with my clients is not just about a roadmap for how to say no. It's a roadmap for how to root your security internally so that like
and integrate these things so you actually feel these things. You're not just going through the motions.
exactly. And I also think that again, applying this specifically to boundaries, when people go from the lifetime of flimsy fences to just no is a complete sentence, then they just flip over into spiked walls. And they go from saying yes too often to saying no too harshly. And it just comes out as this like weaponized
Well,
answer to the problem.
and then they're removing value from their lives, right? Because there's so many missed opportunities because you're just so quick to say no that you're not letting the light through.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why the reason this is called the Gates method is because the alternative to flimsy fences and spiked walls is selective gates. And selective gates allow you to let the light in. They allow you to follow a no with a yes, or even include qualifications when you say yes. Like, sure, I've got 5 minutes, like just be a little bit more specific so you don't leave things open-ended and get trampled. And really, I think one of the biggest features and benefits of selective gates is that you end up drawing your boundaries around behaviors instead of people. And you effectively give them the keys to accessing you through the gates that you've installed. So it's so much less these like walls, spiked or not, it lets a lot more light in.
Yeah, absolutely. I like it.
Yeah. And I like you.
I like you too.
Thank you so much
Yay.
for doing this with me. That was a lot of fun with my dear friend Laura, and tangent we did far and wide. And I realized that there was one piece that we never really circled back to, which is how to navigate what I'll call pushback on your boundary when it results in some manipulation tactics or even conflict. How to stand firm in your boundary and not cave or get into a fight about it. My next guest, Sarah Ness, will be a great conversation partner to dive into that subject with, and it'll work well with the E of the Gates method, expressing your no without disconnecting. And we can tie in what to do when it still creates a little bit of friction. So next week it'll just be me, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about needs. I brought up the fact that needs and boundaries aren't really the same thing, even though they're both very important and equally valid. So I'll just share some pointers on how to communicate about needs differently than how we communicate about boundaries. And then Sarah will be with me the week after that. Thank you so much for listening. Again, if you would like any support on your journey, explorelovingboundaries.com will get you to my calendar for just a free conversation. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye for now.